Hi. Today I want to talk about some writing related subjects. Um, I've recently read some books that were pretty interesting, and what these books had in common is that they made this setting come to life. The authors were really good at making readers feel like they were right there in the scene with the main character. So, how do good writers do that? If we're writing a fictional story, how do we make this setting come to life for readers? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but today I just wanted to bring out three ways that have worked for me in my writing. So let me open my notes real quick. Okay. So the first thing is to season the story with the details related to the setting. And when I say season, it makes you think of food. Like, for example, I live in Louisiana where we eat a lot of jambalaya. And jambalaya is known here for its Cajun seasoning. But if there's too much Cajun seasoning on a bowl of jambalaya, it's like too much. Like your mouth will be on fire. It will not be fun. You will not want to eat it again. But when jambalaya is seasoned very well, it it makes the food more interesting to your taste buds because you get all these different notes of spices. Um, they hit your palate, and I don't know, it just your palate like wants more of it. So the same principle applies to bringing out details related to setting in stories that we write. We don't want to write in such a way that every paragraph is just full of details about the setting. That is too too much. So it's like having too much seasoning in that jambalaya. But instead, to kind of throughout each chapter, here and there, point out scene related detail or setting related details. Like, I should have prepared a little better and like planned some examples of this, but I didn't because I was lazy today. Um, but let me see if I can just find one real quick. Mm, like I do think this is Mockingjay, and this is one of my favorite books. It still is. I know it's kind of old now, but I really like it because I think it's a very balanced way of writing. It has good voice. It does great with building, um, which is like bringing out the setting in a story in a really good way. Um, Sorry, this is like a really bad uh, live stream because I'm just so slow today. um, I guess like in the beginning of this, yeah, the beginning of this book does pretty good with the setting because the main character is um, we've seen her in a bunch of different settings throughout all of the books. You've seen her in her family home, which was she was in poverty, so you could see that from the way the author described the setting. And then she went to a setting where she was in extravagant riches and luxury. So that was also well described. And now, in this last book in the series, she's visiting her old home. So it starts off by saying, I stare down at my shoes, watching as a fine layer of ash settles on the worn leather. This is where the bed I shared with my sister Prim stood. Over there was the kitchen table, the bricks of the chimney, which collapsed in a charred heap, provide a point of reference for the rest of the house. How else could I orient myself in this sea of gray? Almost nothing remains of District 12. A month ago, the capital's fire bombs obliterated the poor coal miners' houses in the scene, the shops in the town, even the Justice Building. The only area that escaped incineration was the victor's village. I don't know why exactly. So I'll stop there. But this is a nice example of a balanced details related to setting, because the character's voice is still the most powerful thing in the writing at this point. You get it from just those few sentences that we read, we get a pretty good idea of whose head we're in right now. This person has they're not very, what's the word? I want to say exuberant. They're not like a loud person. They're not very loud, but their thoughts are very kind of deadpan. And you pick up on that right away. And that's probably, like I said, the strongest thing that you pick up on while from reading this. But at the same time, the other things that you notice are what she's describing looking at. She first looks down at her shoes. She describes them as worn leather. That's part of the setting because it involves what she's wearing, which tells us also a little bit more about her background and who she is at this point in her life. And then she describes looking over at a bed that she once shared with her sister. And then in an area where the kitchen table used to be. So we start to see it with her. We see that she's in an old area that she no longer lives in anymore, and that she's looking around sort of nostalgically, but it sounds like she's too deadpan to be nostalgic. Like she wants to be, but she can't. And even that adds to, well, the descriptions of the setting in this point add to our ability to categorize this main character and her current state of mind. It's showing us how she sees the world in this place that's very sad and that's been destroyed partially. So that wasn't it was a good example, but I didn't explain it very well. Sorry about that. But the point is, if you season your story with just a few details related to setting, like maybe the dust on a windowsill, or if the room is cold, like bringing that out a little bit, that it's chilly, that can help to make a story, the setting of a story, really come to life and help the reader to feel like they're right there with the main character. So yeah, if you're in a neighborhood, if you're in your main character's neighborhood for a scene, why not take a second to let the audience know what it looks like? What kind of neighborhood is it? Is it well kept, or is it kind of run down? And if it is well kept, what particular details make it well kept? Like, are the sidewalks so wide and white that they're practically sparkling, or is every lawn manicured? Those are the kind of little details that it's good to bring out, as you also offer a balanced amount of dialogue and a powerful voice for the main character. The second tip is to create an author's manual, even if it's just one page long, that briefly explains your fictional world's history and culture. And this is important because those two things impact everything about the story. History impacts the culture of the people who live in that part of the world. Like if there have been a lot of wars in a particular area, that's going to impact the way the characters in that setting interact with each other. They might be more close-knit with each other and prone to being kind of suspicious of outsiders. So that could have a huge bearing on your story. Or maybe there are different races within one culture. Like maybe they don't get along for some reason. And it's important for you as a writer to understand why. what is the history between these different subcultures within the main culture. And in order to have that clear in our head as writers, it's good for us to take a second and write a little story of our own. Even like I said, if it's just one page, it doesn't have to be an actual manual that just describes what kind of region your main character comes from and how growing up in that setting has shaped their perspective on life, because that's all part of world building, and that's all part of what brings a story to life. Just like when you think about us as real people, we are who we are because of our history. And a huge part of our history is where we grew up, what we were exposed to, what did we have to see every day, and how did seeing those specific things every day affect us subconsciously. So it's really important to understand all of that as you are writing your character's story. Because if you know all that, eventually, and if it's real to you, eventually that'll also be real to your readers. The third tip is something that I've done a couple of times with stories, especially stories that are science fiction, is I've drawn a map of the world that I'm writing about because it's just easier. Sometimes it's hard to keep track of things, where things are, if you just have a visual map, if you just have a map in your head instead of an actual something visual you can look at and reference. Because like one of the projects I had was this, I think it was six books long, 6-book series that's science fiction, and it takes place in like three major mains, three major settings. First setting was a small town in Alabama. The second setting is a small town in Louisiana. And the third setting is another planet across the universe. So to help me keep track of where everything was, and just even direction wise, I had to draw some maps. I drew a map of the town in South Louisiana. And I even put that map online just in case like readers wanted to see it for themselves, because so many of the settings in the books that I wrote happened in that little town. So I was like, well, if readers want this extra information too, since I have it, I might as well just put it online. So readers can look at my badly drawn map of a fictional town called Swamp Rose. But it really did help. It brought the story to life for me when I was drawing the map. And it also made sure that I kept the story as accurate as possible, logistics wise, because I wouldn't, mess up on whether something was in the east direction or west direction, because I could always just refer to the map and see where everything was. So that can be really helpful when you're trying to do better with world building in a story, is to actually just draw a map of the fictional place you've created. And if it's a real place, then like go online and look at a real map to get a good idea of where things are. And that'll help keep the continuity of your story. So yeah, the 3 tips were to first of all have a well balanced amount of details that relate to very specific things about your setting, like whether, like if you're in a room, is the couch in the room worn and old, or is it new? The smell of a place, does this room smell like freshly baked apple pie, or does it smell like mold? Those little things can enhance the reader's experience. The second tip was to create a little author's manual that briefly explains your fictional world's history and culture. And the third tip was to even draw a map of your fictional world, or if it's a real world, go on Google and look up the map and kind of study it so you have a good idea of where things are happening in your story. All right, well, that is all I've got for today. I hope that's helpful to someone, and thank you for watching. Bye.